The first thing I wanted to ask you about, David, is and I know you talked about this on Nothing Personal, but I want the most interesting things about Endeavor getting together UFC and WWE as a business deal, as a $9 billion business deal.
It's even more. It's a $21 billion business deal. They valued WWE at $9 billion, and they valued UFC at $12 billion. And there's a lot of negotiation that goes into that. What that means is who owns what percentage of shares of this public company that they are creating. The true value of the company will come when those shares are available to market and where they're priced by the investment banks, and then what happens to the market once the shares are available to be bought and sold. The real question that excites me is picturing Dana White, Ari Emanuel, Vince McMahon, and Tony Khan in a room as they try to negotiate. I'm sorry?
Nick Khan.
Nick Khan. Who's Tony?
It's a different con man.
Yeah, Tony owns the competitor.
Tony's a very nice man, Dan.
Nick and Tony are related?
No, they're
not.
not.
Con man. He is a con man. He's literally a con man. Like, that's literal.
I know what you're doing there.
Tony is Shad Khan's son. They own Fulham and Jacksonville and AEW.
So it's Nick. Thank you.
Correct.
It's all a con.
It may be a con, except it's going to be decided by people who actually buy shares, which could be you, or you could buy it in the retirement plan that is so amazing at Meadowlark. People could go buy shares.
Would you buy shares, though, in what it is that they're doing? What do you think of it as a business deal? And I want you to take us through as well, whenever you finish that thought, about what it takes to make a $9 billion deal. How do they arrive at that number?
So what they do is they look at the revenues, they look at the free operating income, which is free cash flow, which is there was a leak of the numbers that was part of the presentation that's given to bankers as they try to figure out who's going to own what. So when you're going to merge with a company, and that's really what this is. People are saying it's the UFC buying WWE. That's not at all what it is. They are merging the two of them together and forming a new company. The first thing you have to decide is who's actually going to own more, because you can't make it 50-50. Because any business that is led by a 50-50, you are running the risk of inaction, because you have to have full unanimity to do anything, to figure out the color of paint, or to figure out what TV deal you're going to do or who you're going to hire. So generally, you try to make it 50.1 and 49.9 if you view equally the value that both partners are putting in. And when you're looking at the business of UFC and WWE, there can be no question who is the bigger business right now. It is UFC. And what WWE is doing by admitting that, they took a lesser position in the valuation of the company. But they gave Vince a PR out by naming him the executive chairman of the board, which is the equivalent of nothing. He's going to say that he still has operational control. He's in the room where it happens. But at the end of the day, this is an Endeavor-led project. And the reason WWE did this is they were trying to sell. They wanted to keep a piece, which is what they have. They wanted to keep people in the room and keep operating, which is what they're able to do. But they want to take advantage of this strategic partnership with Endeavor in order to grow their business, because they think that owning 48% of a new company is better than 100% of the old company. And the math only works if the shares go up in value, and we won't know that until it's actually made public. So don't call it a $9 billion deal or a $21 billion deal. We won't really know what it is until we see what the market cap is of this new company.
Plus, Endeavor has proven through their dealings with Dana White that they'll allow the people that know the business to operate the business, and that is fertile grounds for Vince McMahon's ego. But will he be able to actually operate in a silo now that he is in a merged company with the UFC and not the more profitable side of this company? They keep saying that everything will continue as it used to be, but surely there has to be some sort of different aspect of control here that is not being made public.
David is laughing at you.
I'm laughing because here's what can't happen now. Vince McMahon can't pay off people. There can be no more. Maybe he's aged out of that bracket, but there's no more of that. When you are running a public company, when you've got someone who owns a bigger percentage than you do, Vince McMahon now has a boss. And that's something that Vince has never had since he bought the company from his father for $1 million. So I am going to be very surprised if this lasts. So here's how it ends when these mergers take place. You can name co-presidents, or you can do it what's supposed to be a 50-50. But at the end, what happens within 5 years at most, but mostly it's really earlier than that, someone will be gone. And I think it will be Vince.
Interesting, because Vince was gone, and he clawed his way back, and he clawed his way back on the back of this Endeavor deal. So I want to know, for the consumer, though, what can they expect out of this merger? Is there a chance here that this media entity bundles its rights? The WWE rights are up at the end of the year, and they're supposed to get a major deal, especially with Nick Khan heading up negotiations. What kind of crossover corporate synergy might there be with these? I mean, they're similar, but they're very different. One's a real, true combat sport. The other one's a made-for-television stage program that's scripted.
Yeah, so think about what WrestleMania did. I think that at SoFi, they had about $21 million in ticket sales over 2 nights. Were you there, Mike?
Yeah.
So when you go to a UFC fight and you go to WrestleMania, it's 2 different types of entertainment, but to a broadcaster, you are giving them tremendous programming. And so the reason why you'd bundle it is you can go to different areas in different countries, including the US, and instead of offering X hours, you now can offer X plus Y hours. And the view is that you're going to get paid more than the sum of the parts. And that's why you do these mergers. But there will be some economies of scale that'll happen, which means you don't need a separate marketing department, as an example, or a separate sales department for WWE and UFC. So there's going to be consolidation. They're going to have to cut expenses, like you've seen with a lot of the media mergers that have taken place, where expenses get cut because you've got duplication in job descriptions. So this is going to take some time to figure out how to maximize it. But that's what shareholders, and that's what Wall Street is looking for. They're looking for more profitability. They don't care about who wins or what's fixed or what's not. This is solely done based on the numbers in a very robotic, unemotional way as they try to figure out what the value of this entity is. So when you're going out and selling your TV rights, you do want to put those 2 groups together, because that is where they have the most power, is in bringing in those rights fees.
And they're not beholden to combining their rights across the board. They can work out deals internationally, right, where they bundle their rights for certain countries but split them up in the United States. Interesting note, you mentioned that they might consolidate some positions behind the scenes, like marketing and public relations. That all makes perfect sense, David.
Yes.
I don't know if he answered the question of whether he would buy stock or not in this. I
did tell you, because I don't know where it's going to be priced. I mean, who would ever answer that question?
Well, I guess I'm just saying, do you believe, because you're saying things I have not heard elsewhere about thinking that this is a little bit doomed, not as a business, but these entities staying together. You're questioning whether or not these people can coexist without ego. And I'm asking you whether you believe the partnership, you say it's a valuable streaming service, whether it is something.
It is. It's usually valuable to Peacock. That it's quantifiable how much they've actually increased subs.
ESPN, it's being reported that ESPN is going to want to get into the WWE business.
Well, they have all the relationships there. I have one more question about the workforce, because a lot of the talent that makes this thing go is they're all independent contractors. They have had individual incidents of people trying to unionize, and for 2 publicly traded companies, WWE and UFC, once it got folded into Endeavor, they've been able to stop this. Is a union amongst fighters and wrestlers a more possible thing now that this is all one big company?
So when you go out on Wall Street and you have what's called a prospectus, where you are giving information about the projections of this combined company and why this combined company is more valuable than the companies that are separated, part of that prospectus is a big part of the document are the risks. And what the risks are in this case, unionization of labor, that's the same thing as saying increased cost of labor. And the labor are the fighters, the labor are the wrestlers. What do you pay people to provide the entertainment that enables you to get these rights fees? Which is the same thing as saying, what are the costs of goods sold? Will it be more expensive to put this product out? And I think it is clear that if this business is valued the way they claim it's valued, and it becomes a public company, there are going to be plenty of people who are going to step in there and say these fighters and these wrestlers should be paid a higher percentage of revenue, something that Dana White has been very clear about. His operating strategy has been increased profit margin by increasing revenue and holding expenses flat. So a percentage of revenue that is paid to players in football, in basketball, the more revenue the NBA has, the higher the salary cap.
Yep.
They're tied in very many ways, actually. In football, it's the same. In baseball, it's not specified, but generally 48 to 51% of revenue goes to salaries. Dana White has had the opposite view. He wants the lowest percentage possible to show profitability. But at some point, the fighters are going to get together and they're going to realize that that is not the proper way to go forward. And that is a risk in terms of profitability.
Well, I think it's probably why Dana White and Vince McMahon are running these individual entities, because over the course of their decades now on the job, they've been able to stifle any unionization attempts, be it the former UFC heavyweight champion who tried for a power play and he tried and failed, and Vince McMahon has snuffed out any feeble attempts to unionize on his end. That's where they bring their biggest value possibly to Endeavor. Do you foresee cross-promotion? UFC has a deal here in the United States with ESPN. Do you see them promoting WWE cards on their programming? Are there any rules against that? And I'm sure someone has already bandied about the idea of a mega card, where you try to get both fan bases to buy one singular event where you have wrestling matches and mixed martial arts matches.
Can you not imagine a scenario where you combine WrestleMania, the way you just said, with what they just did in SoFi? Can you imagine what would happen? You put that in Vegas, you put UFC somewhere else, and in Los Angeles, put it at MetLife, put it somewhere else, and you're talking about making it a huge multi-day event. Look at what goes on. I don't know if you guys pay attention to this, but what goes on, something called BravoCon. BravoCon is this entity that was put together through all the shows that are on Bravo, and they get all the fans together who like all these different shows. They cross everyone over. They bring in all talent from all over. They charge a ton of money. Everybody makes a ton of money. The network does. It's a bonanza of revenue that comes from brand affinity. And what UFC and WWE have going for them is tremendous brand affinity. Now it's time to exploit that brand affinity, and you can further exploit it by combining the efforts. That was the purpose of this merger. But Dan, to your point, my biggest issue is that you are combining two egos that may be amongst the two biggest egos in the space of sports and entertainment. And when you're talking about Dana White and Vince McMahon, that I do not see a world in which they sit in a room together and work together to make a business bigger.